First of all, this is going to be settled in a second phase, along with the nuclear issue. And as I said before, a handful of other issues as well. And it's going to be part of the negotiating process. And the truth is, you're not going to get any concessions from the Iranians that they're willing to sign off on regarding the nuclear issue unless you get agreement on the Strait. And so this will be settled later. And the end result is that Iran will end up controlling the Strait. This leads to my second point. What is President Trump going to do to prevent Iran from controlling the Strait? This war has been going on since February 28th. And as you and I both know, Danny, if we had the capability to take back control of the Strait, or take control of the Strait is more accurate, we would have done it by now. We can't do it. We do not have the military wherewithal. And the last thing we want to do is continue the war against Iran. It would be catastrophic from our point of view. So we're not going to launch a military operation to take back the Strait. All of that tells you they're going to end up controlling the Strait, as Professor Morandi makes clear.
Let me ask you something on that, because that's one thing that kind of puzzles me. I mean, just looking at this, even at a surface level, with no military experience, with no foreign policy experience, if you can see, we tried for about 40 days to defeat Iran militarily. We tried to assassinate their leaders, to decapitate them, all that kind of stuff. And nothing we did was able to wrest control of the Strait from them, for all these different reasons, because there's so many different ways that they could control civilian traffic coming out of the Strait. Then why do we have people like John Bolton, like Pompeo, who you just debated here recently? So maybe you can give us some better, even closer information here. Why do they still keep saying, no, let's go back and, quote, finish the job? Let's solve this militarily. How can they make that argument when we've already tried and failed?
Well, you can make any argument you want in the United States of America today and get away with it. Especially inside the mainstream media, especially on platforms like Fox. So you have all of these war hawks who make these statements that make no sense when you look carefully at what our capabilities are. The idea that we have to go in and finish the job, that sounds good. Rah, rah, America, let's go in there. Let's finish the job. We're the most powerful state in the world. Don't tell us we can't have our way. We can just need the willpower. That's what's lacking here. President Trump is getting weak-kneed. We got to stiffen his backbone and then send the American military in there and they'll do the job. This sounds good to a lot of people, sounds like a prescription for success. But if you look carefully at what we can actually do and what we tried to do and didn't do in the first 40 days of the conflict, it becomes manifestly apparent that these people are speaking nonsense. We have no military option here. We couldn't get control of the Strait. We couldn't bring Iran to their knees, the Iranians to their knees in the first 40 days of the war with massive air power. What makes them think we can do it now? And oh, by the way, when we stopped bombing in mid-April, we then went to the blockade, and everybody was saying the blockade would work. Well, the blockade hasn't worked. And nobody really believes on the inside, or anybody who has an analytical mind, that you can use the blockade plus a renewed bombing campaign to bring the Iranians to surrender. It just can't be done. And if it can be done, it would be nice if those people could tell us what the causal story is. In other words, what targets do we hit? What effects do those attacks have on the Iranian leadership? How do we cause them to surrender? And what about the historical record? When we look at past cases where, you bombed a country like Iran after one big campaign, you launched the second campaign. What's the historical record say about why we should be confident it will work this time when it didn't work the first time? And of course, they have no such stories. They just make these empty statements that we have to go finish the job. which
Well,
means,
if I could ask you to summarize, you were in a debate recently that included Mike Pompeo, which we've highlighted here a few times. But what is, if you can summarize, what is their argument that why we should do it? To try this compulsion situation.
well, the thing is that Mike Pompeo said remarkably little about what we should do to win the war, because Mike Pompeo is smart enough to know that there is no magic formula. And the last thing that he wants to do is get into a debate with me and Steve Wall about what we should do
Yeah.
to win the war. He concentrates on making the argument that the Iranians are basically the second coming of the Third Reich. They're the most evil regime.
Amazing.
The Iranian regime is the most evil regime on the planet, and we have to finish it off. And therefore, it was good that President Trump went to war against Iran. And he's fully aware that it's a tough fight, but it's a fight worth waging. But he has no solution as to how we can win this war. And he doesn't go to that issue because he fully understands that there is no magic formula there.
Well, then let me ask, because I mean, he's not an island unto himself. He certainly has a lot of supporters and backings and other. Can we draw from that there are those who just say, I know we can't. I'm not stupid. I know the military balance and all the causal issues you just mentioned, but that they're okay with just perpetual conflict. And they're like, as long as we're just fighting, that in itself is a success. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I don't know if that's Mike Pompeo's view, but I think there are a lot of people who believe that if we keep throwing mud at the wall, at some point it will stick. It's not sticking now, but we just have to hang in there. We're incredibly powerful, and we can do this for a long time. And sooner or later, the mud's going to stick, and we're going to have an effective outcome. The Iranians are going to throw up their hands. And you want to remember, this is, I think, their worldview, that we live in an uncertain world. You can never be perfectly sure what's going to happen when you employ military force against an adversary. And they believe there's a good chance that this will work out. And you want to remember that if this doesn't work out, if we don't go back to fighting the war, we don't renew the air campaign, and we effectively surrender to Iran, which is what we're going to end up doing, Iran is going to clearly win this war. These people are going to have egg on their face. It's going to be a huge embarrassment for them for the rest of their life. They're going to have to explain how they thought we could win this war and therefore acted as cheerleaders getting us into the war. And therefore, they have a vested interest in trying to continue the war in hope that they'll gain resurrection.
It's interesting. I'm going to show you here three of the biggest cheerleaders that have been going throughout this whole thing here and where they are right now. We're going to start with Jack Keane here. Now, he has been adamant from before the war started, especially back in the January timeframe. He was saying no negotiations. Do not have a deal with these people because it would empower them and whatever. If they stay in power, it's a bad thing. After we got into this ceasefire, he again repeated that. Well, yesterday on Fox News, he had a little bit of an odd twist, I think, and I don't know if he's opening up, because you're going to see in the second half of this soundbite here, he seems to go back to the original part, but now it sounds like he's saying, well, maybe there can be a deal.
There's an opportunity for maybe we can get where we need to be, and we don't have to go back to military operations, and we can avoid the horror that we're going to inflict, and also the potential risks to casualties of our own people. So, yeah, he wants the nuclear deal as he has laid it out. No reason to go into the details here. He wants the ballistic missile program completely restricted. He wants no support to the proxies. And obviously, job one, open up the Straits of Hormuz with no restrictions, no implication that somehow, some way, Iran has some control over what is now legally recognized as international waterway, and freedom of navigation has precedence. And he's insisting on getting them there, and he's giving fair warning to the Iranians. If we're not going to get there, then it's likely we're going to return to military operations.
So he still wants to land back, but we still should go back to operations. But what do you make of the first part to where, as far as I can see, that's the first time he's ever said, well, maybe we can have a negotiated settlement?
I agree with you. It sounds like he's woken up and smelled the coffee. It really does. I mean, uh, he was not talking about going back and bombing Iran again. He, of course, at the end said that's a possibility, but he was, I think, extolling the virtues in his own way of the deal that Trump is trying to work out. I find it hard to believe that a former four-star general hasn't figured out by now that we don't have a military option. I mean, it's so obvious. All you have to do is look at what we've done to the inventories. We've used about a third of our Tomahawk missiles. We've just told the Japanese that these 400 Tomahawk missiles that they bought from us, we can't deliver them for maybe 3 more years. Can you believe that? We've taken THAADs, we've taken Patriots, we've taken a Marine unit out of East Asia and moved them to the Middle East. And despite all of this, we've not won in any meaningful military way. And surely General Keane understands that if we go back to lambasting Iran with air power, they have a second strike capability and they can do enormous damage in the Gulf region, to include shutting down the Red Sea, tearing up cables underneath the Strait of Hormuz, turning or sending the UAE back to the Stone Age. I mean, we just have no military option here. You just have to face up to that. And I think that that's what he's done. I mean, he did not say anything there that I found to be foolish.
You know, Jack Keane, General Kellogg, who's going to be coming up next year, and then Lindsey Graham. All three of these guys have telephone rights to President Trump, and he has, by Trump's own accounting, he listens to these guys a lot. So you talked about it, maybe Jack Keane's woken up and smelled the coffee. General Kellogg is still apparently asleep.
He's dealing with a theocratic leadership. There's really 4 people he's dealing with. You look at Khamenei, who is basically the supreme leader, but we haven't seen him because he was injured on an airstrike. But you also have Arachi, who's their foreign minister. He wrote the book on negotiations. You look at Fahidi, who's their Revolutionary Guards, and he's a theocratic nut. And then you've got probably the only guy that's reasonable is Pezeshkian, who's the president, but he's got no control over it. They're actually following their game plan pretty well, the Iranians, and what they call mosaic. And what they did is they decentralized all of the Revolutionary Guards so each one's in command of their own areas. That's the reason you're seeing them do dumb things like sending boats out into the Gulf. I don't think it's control at the senior level at all. I think the president's in their head. They're on a losing side right now. And I'm one of those who keeps pushing for, the only way you can get it is changing for a theocratic leadership. There are people out there who can do that. You know, when you look at Raza Pahlavi, who's the son of the former Shah.
So they're losing, and we should still go back to regime change, which is what he said he continues to advocate for. What do you make of that?
Well, you and I listened to him on Ukraine, and a lot of what he said made no sense on Ukraine. And President Trump would have been a lot better off if he was truly interested in settling the Ukraine war, if he had kept General Kellogg far away. But instead, he listened to General Kellogg, and we are where we are on
Great point.
Ukraine. And you have basically the same phenomenon at play here. I mean, the fact is that Iran is winning the war. Iran is going to win the war. We have achieved none of our objectives. Furthermore, Iran now controls the Strait of Hormuz, which it didn't control on February 27th. Furthermore, there's all sorts of evidence that once a deal is worked out, Iran is going to get a huge amount of economic relief compared to where it was at.
Yeah.
So Iran's going to come out of this a winner. You know, they're going to have to make some concessions on the nuclear program, but they weren't interested in acquiring a nuclear weapon anyway. So I think
On the 26th of February, the day before you're talking about there, they had actually put all that on the table and said, we'll negotiate all this stuff away to one degree or another. So that's not anything that they haven't already put there. So they literally lose nothing even on that point.
Yeah. So they're the winners in this war. And it's not to say they haven't suffered as a result of the war.
Yeah.
They're the winners. And Kellogg refuses to admit that. And he still is under the illusion that we can use the hammer to bring them to their knees, to get them to surrender. And as I said before, and as you know better than I do, there's just no military strategy that's available to us, to the United States, or to the United States and Israel, to rescue the situation. If there was, we would have tried it already. We tried bombing for 40 days. It didn't work. Then we went to the blockade. It hasn't worked. And what are you going to do next? And the answer is you're going to try and negotiate your way out of this. And what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to sound like General Keane. To go back to General Keane, what he was trying to do was put lipstick on a pig, right? He was trying to make it clear that we have to cut a deal, but President Trump will ultimately get the best deal possible and will come out smelling like a rose, that kind of argument. And President Trump's going to have to make that case at some point. His biggest problem there will be convincing the Israelis, who fully understand that from their point of view, what's happened here is catastrophic.